What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Be the Number. I'm your host, Spencer Aguiar, and I appreciate you joining me here for the Farmers Insurance Open. Before we get started again on the tournament this week, and you will notice that I am going solo again, but I just wanted to comment on being nominated next to Pat Mayo and Brian DeCourty as one of three finalists for this year's FSWA Golf Writer of the Year award. For those that don't know what I am talking about, I would describe it as the fantasy equivalent to the Academy Awards. You don't have to look any further than who I am up against to realize the magnitude of everything, but it was a massive privilege to be recognized and included next to two of the most respected names in the space. The announcement wasn't something I took lightly, and I owe a lot to everyone that either listens to the podcasts I am on, like Be the Number, or takes time out of their day to read my written work. Without the support, there is no recognition. So thank you so much for making me a part of your week, and thank you to the Fantasy Sports Writers Association for nominating me for their prestigious award. But let's get right into what everyone came here to listen to, which is the breakdown of the Farmers Insurance Open Board on Draftkings. You're going to hear the term actionable metrics a lot from me this week throughout all of the content I provide. And the reason I believe the term is so important is because we can quickly get stuck looking into faulty data when you receive events that don't fit the norm. In fairness, you can get trapped into that same loophole every week, but the fact we have extra information and more room for error means users will unfortunately make an amplified number of mistakes when trying to process the numbers. Our goal is to figure out how to not fall into that trap and hopefully take advantage of the situations where we can. I used this example in my DraftKings article on Rotoballer, but it's worth repeating that we had a trend from 2011 to 2018 where every winner of this tournament started on the South course in round one and played the North in round two. The general theory behind that was golfers who had to play 3 consecutive days at the more challenging South layout were at too harsh of a disadvantage because of the discrepancy and difficulty between the tracks. We even saw DFS players blindly stack their builds to fit this notion for a handful of years until the tides turned and the past 3 winners flipped the script of starting on the North and ending with the once dreaded barrage at the South. As a sports bettor, I hate talking about trends because they are the weakest form of an argument you can make. It's like the roulette bettors that think it must come black after 10 straight reds, or that it's going to come red again because it's on a roll. Trends are always going to be extremely dangerous, but while 99% of what I just mentioned above was somewhat fluky, there is something worth taking away from it. I want to be very careful with this comment since there is no argument that the South is easier, but it's mostly easier through a very specific stretch. Tom Weiskopf did some redesign work on the North right before the 2017 tournament to give it an updated feel. He made it clear over the years that the North was to remain the more straightforward test since over 80,000 rounds a year are played by amateurs on that property. But the majority of the scoring difference and even yardage difference that we see takes place on 6 holes. We have a 440-yard difference between the two tracks. 233 of that comes on the 4 par 5s. The reduction gives us a 15.22% higher birdie or better percentage on those holes. There are also 2 short par 4s under 340 yards, one being drivable at 322 yards. I realize 6 holes are a ton when you only have 18 in play, but that is where your true difference is coming. 7 of the 8 par 3s are at the two courses are over 200 yards. There are 5 par 4s, 450 yards or above at the North. There are technically 7 at the South, although 2 fall just short of that number and could potentially stretch out further on certain tee shots. That gives you the remaining disparity that you are missing. But the North has a ton of similarities to the South when you remove the easier scoring opportunities. To put that into perspective, nearly 63% of all birdies or better per round at the North occur at the 4 par 5s and 2 short par 4s. And that isn't even taking into account the downside that comes into play. We are only looking for scoring upside in that original example. I will note that my model is a split of 70% stats, 20% course history, and 10% current form. But to discuss the statistical portion of what I weighed, I started with 20% on par 5 birdie or better percentage. That is a category that plays at both courses and is amplified for different reasons at each. I did 15% on a weighted proximity category over 150 yards. That is going to be redistributed to amplify the exact percentages, but 66.1% of irons come from this distance. Torrey Pines has a habit of giving players the same looks over and over again. I typically like to redistribute the entire complexion of second shots, but the more pertinent numbers are 150 yards and beyond here. I did 15% on ball striking. That was a 75-25 split of distance over accuracy to form total driving, and then a 70-30 breakdown of total driving over GIR percentage. Most of the winners of this event have finished inside the top 25 on tour in driving distance during the year of their victory. There are some outliers where golfers like Patrick Reed tore the course apart with his short game, but distance is a nice weapon to have. I did a weighted par 3 and par 4 category that looked at some of the longer holes in those examples for 10%. It took a mathematical split that mimicked the layout and then also added in some bogey avoidance. Weighted short game for 15%. That is my combination I use of around the green, 3-putt percentage, and sand safe percentage. All three of those categories were rolled into one number. And I finished with 15% on a weighted POA category that took both strokes gained total on POA and strokes gained putting on POA. I like that combination because it highlighted an overall array of the surface and not just this total aspect where bad putters got away with no repercussion to their total. Top 5 of that model yielded Rahm, Xander, Finau, Hideki, and Thomas. When running it for upside, Burns snuck his way into the fray and removed Hideki. But let's go into things in a very similar fashion of last week. I don't want to keep everyone here for long. It was a nice little short show last week. I will note that Hudson Swafford did manage to make his way into my best 6K value portion of that show. So that's encouraging for how my model is running. But I will begin in the $10,000 and above section and rapid fire through as many names as possible. But Jon Rahm leads the way at 11,200 and is followed by Justin Thomas at 10,900, Hideki Matsuyama 10,600, Dustin Johnson 10,300, Xander Schauffele 10,100, and Daniel Berger 10,000. Rahm's course history is magnificent. 7th, 2nd, 5th, 1st, and a U.S. Open victory in 5 of his last 6 at the stop. I don't want to necessarily give him credit for the U.S. Open because it doesn't include the North Course, nor will this week be as difficult as he had there. But it's a good indication of how the venue suits his eye. Ownership is starting to run wild as of Monday night, with Rahm pushing 25% and being the highest player by nearly 4% on the entire board. That is something I think you should monitor as the week goes on, because 25% does become a little bit troublesome in a tournament like this. I will lump Thomas and Dustin Johnson into one here since both possess more upside than they do safety. I prefer Thomas if comparing the two together, but the same general boom or bust potential is in play for each. I'm kind of shocked of Hideki's ownership right now being 10%, even if I don't necessarily hate the number that he has right now in the pricing on DraftKings. These difficult tests are always better suited for his game, and we have seen him win during 2 of his past 3 starts on tour. It will come down to solely ownership, though. I would be looking for a massive outlier on either Hideki, Dustin Johnson, or Justin Thomas if I'm using them. We aren't quite there yet on any of the 3 players, but let's see where the ownership goes. I think Xander's will increase. We'll get into that in a second. And then Rahm's, as I mentioned, is running away as of this moment. But Berger has terrible course history and typically is better suited for par 70 tests or short par 72s. But my model did rank him 6th from a statistical perspective. And then, as surprised as I was with Hideki's ownership, I was just as shocked with Xander for a different reason. I would have expected him to be the chalk play of the week with him being in his hometown. But there is residual effect that seems to be taking place from him missing 4 of his first 5 cuts in his career at Torrey Pines before posting 3 top 25s over his last 4. So my favorite play in this range is probably Xander if he hovers around 12%. Let's see where the projection goes there. I probably will bite the bullet against Rahm and hope for the best if he's going to be 25% in GPPs. Play him in cash games, that's fine. I think he's one of the safer plays on the board, but 25% in GPPs can create some leverage for you. And that's mass field GPPs. If we're talking about single entries, throw all of that out the window. It doesn't matter quite as much in those types of tournaments, but there's nothing bad to say about Rahm's game or how he suits the track, but there's an opening to get different. And I will monitor ownership for the other 4. If someone becomes the forgotten about guy, that's where I would be sold. But moving into the 9,000s, I will try to mention my favorite 2 or 3 golfers as of Monday night in each of the rest of these categories. I don't want to get carried away with a 156 player breakdown where we cover every single person in this tournament, but you always have to consider Bryson DeChambeau when he's not only outside of the $10,000 zone, but also hovering around 10% in ownership. His statistical makeup of distance, long irons, and being a good putter is exactly what you want for Torrey Pines at 9,900. Sam Burns will be a wait and see with his ownership trickling up in the week. I do like his makeup for this course, which is evident by a top 20 here last year. But let's see where that total goes. It's right now about 16%, which is marginally too high. I would prefer it more in the 12 to 15% range. I know we're getting technical there, and I do think that there is a chance that this drops with some of the ownership around Finau and these guys, but let's monitor that. Mark Leishman has some of the best top to bottom potential at 9,000. The ownership is a positive on my model. The price is a positive. He grew up on Kikuyu grass, which is a sticky grass that can cause players fit. Give a boost to all Australians here for that reason. I don't think I need another reason to talk about Jason Day, but guys like Day and Leishman are going to find success. We've seen them being past winners at this tournament. And then I'm leaning towards Finau as more of a cash play at 9,100. His course history is magnificent. We see his form fits any single time. We get short game metrics with it. His around the green game is one of the best on tour. But 21% is starting to enter the territory I never want to be on any golfer that lacks win equity. And that's not to say that he won't win. I do think that this is the perfect course for him to win at. I got into this industry 5 years ago, and this was the first tournament I covered then. And I wrote the article saying that it was going to be Tony Finau's coming out party, that this was going to be his first big victory that he had on tour outside of the Puerto Rico tournament. And it didn't happen. He came in the top 10, faltered on Sunday. I think that that's what you get too often with him. My model places him third overall. I think there's a ton of reasons to like him, but decisions will have to be made for exposure. You don't want to be around public consensus. That's the one thing I will note here. You either want to be way over or way under. The worst thing you can do is become the rake of the week, to where you kind of bleed away and you play all the popular plays and you min cash, and then you have a bad week and you end up losing. Like, you want your wins in your chart at the end of the year to look where you might trickle down for a couple weeks, and then when you hit big with it. So keep that in mind when you make your rosters and you're making your builds. But the 8,000s have a ton of potential. Patrick Reed is a former winner with great course history at 8,700. Matthew Wolff is a wild card at 8,500. I wouldn't look too deeply into his results last week. In theory, it was a terrible first round that undid him. He looks fine outside of that, but this is a much better venue for him that should accentuate his skill set of long iron play, par 5 scoring, and difficult courses. And a lot of the same can be said for Max Homa at 8,300. Homa ranks 6th in this field when it comes to par 5 birdie or better percentage, and is also 6th in my combined POA category. That places him next to Rahm, DeChambeau, Xander, and Burns as the 5 golfers that can say that. And last but not least in the 8,000s would be Maverick McNeely. Anytime you get him on POA in California, it's always worth a look. 8,200 is probably a small underpricing, which might increase his ownership, but he has posted 14 made cuts over his last 15 tournaments. I think he's a guy who's going to at least be safe with upside, that's going to have some popularity around him. You always more so want that, and the pricing is good enough to take a chance with it. The thing you don't want is the volatility and the high ownership. That's where you can run into some problems. A guy like Luke List in the 7,000s is a good example of that. I really like Luke List this week. I think he's one of my preferred values if just looking in terms of where his price is, but there's other ways to play him. Maybe a top 40 bet, maybe a top 20 bet if you want to take it a little bit deeper with it. But ownership does matter when it gets really concentrated into areas. But the 7Ks have a ton of choices. We are always littered with options possible where you can round out builds. But I'm going to mention the two that I like the best in a lot of markets this week, which would be Charlie Hoffman at 7,100 and Wyndham Clark at 7,200. You're going to have tons of incredible leverage spots possible. Billy Horschel at 7,800 would be just one to mention here. But there are a few things I love about the two I mentioned originally. So with Hoffman, the par 5 scoring and short game worry me a little, but POA is going to give him his most significant boost. He ranks inside of the top 20 of my model in ball striking and weighted long iron proximity. And he's been fine here in the past, posting 2 top 10s and 3 additional top 50s over his past 8 starts at the track. And then for Wyndham Clark, there might be reasons to believe he has finally figured something out with his dreaded iron play. We saw him lose 12 of 16 times over a multiple month stretch, but he has gained strokes to the field in 4 of his last 6, highlighted by a 13th place finish during last week's American Express. Clark and DeChambeau are the only 2 players in this field that rank top 10 in both driving distance and POA putting. And despite averaging nearly -3 strokes with his approach game in his 3 starts at Torrey Pines, his 2 top 40s show that the sky is the limit if he strikes the ball marginally better this week. That will take us down into the end of the board, though, in the 6,000s. As always, you can find additional thoughts of mine every week on the Win Daily Golf Show that I film with Sia Najad and Joel Schreck, or inside the Better Golf podcast that I do with Nick Bretwish, where we take you through the entire board from a betting perspective. But to talk about this $6,000 range a little, I'm not a huge fan down in this section if I can avoid it. I think Trey Molinex at 6,200, Sepp Straka 6,300, Sahith Theegala 6,500. JT Poston was a guy I targeted last week that made it a top 40, almost got a top 20 out of that at 6,400. I think he's striking the ball well right now. We might be able to get him on a heater. He would probably be the one I like the most with the form he's bringing in. I know Straka has a good tournament last week. Theegala had a good tournament last week, but some of these guys were carried a little bit more so by their putter. I thought Poston struck the ball well. And then Tyler McCumber 6,300 would be one of my final ultimate dart throws. But for the most part, I'm trying to wrap up most of my builds in the $7,000 if I can. But that will do it for me this week on another quick show of Be the Number. As always, thank you so much for tuning into this program. It means a lot to me that you give it a listen. If you aren't doing so already, you can follow me on Twitter at @TOffSports. There I post my model weekly, which allows you to make a copy of your own, or you can give this show a follow at Be the Number Pod. I will be back here a week from now for Pebble Beach, and I look forward to catching up with everyone then. Good luck at the Farmers, guys.